Have you ever woken up after giving birth, only to discover years later that someone had stolen your child? I have. My name is Victoria Reed. I'm 27 years old, and the person who destroyed my life wasn't a stranger. It was my own husband. I live in Seattle, Washington, with my husband, Jason Reed. For 3 years, I believed I had the perfect marriage. When I found out I was pregnant, Jason seemed happier than anyone. He attended every doctor's appointment. He decorated the nursery. He constantly told everyone how excited he was to become a father. I believed I was the luckiest woman in the world. 9 months later, I went into labor. Because of complications, the doctors rushed me into an emergency C-section at Evergreen Medical Center. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia took effect was Jason holding my hand. "Everything will be okay," he whispered. When I opened my eyes hours later, I was weak and exhausted. A nurse smiled warmly. "Congratulations, Mrs. Reed. You have a beautiful baby boy." I smiled through my tears. "Can I see him?" A few minutes later, they placed my son in my arms. He was perfect. Tiny fingers, tiny nose. I immediately fell in love. I asked the nurse, "Was everything okay during the surgery?" She nodded. "Everything went well." That was it. Nobody mentioned anything unusual. Nobody said there had been another baby. For the next 2 years, I happily raised my son. Then one ordinary afternoon, I visited Evergreen Medical Center to request copies of my medical records for an insurance matter. The receptionist searched my file. Suddenly, she frowned. She looked at her screen, then looked back at me. "Mrs. Reed, there seems to be something strange." My heart started beating faster. "What is it?" She hesitated before speaking. "According to your delivery records, you didn't give birth to one baby. You gave birth to twins." The room started spinning. I stared at her in complete shock. "What did you just say?" She turned the monitor toward me. There it was. Delivery, twin A, twin B. My hands began to shake. For 2 years, I had believed I was the mother of one child, but the hospital records were telling me I had given birth to 2. If that was true, where was my second baby? I drove home in complete silence. My hands were trembling so badly that I could barely hold the steering wheel. The receptionist's words kept echoing in my mind. "You gave birth to twins." The moment I walked into the house, Jason was sitting in the living room playing with our son. He smiled. "You're home early." I didn't smile back. I threw the hospital records onto the coffee table. His smile disappeared. "What are these?" he asked. I looked straight into his eyes. "Tell me the truth." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I pointed at the papers. "The hospital says I gave birth to twins." For a few seconds, Jason said nothing. Then he looked away. That was the moment I knew. He knew the truth. I raised my voice. "Where is my baby?" He stood up nervously. "Victoria, calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down. Tell me where my child is." He covered his face with both hands. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Those 2 words shattered my heart. "What did you do?" I asked through tears. Jason sat down and confessed. "When you were unconscious after the surgery, the doctors told me our babies looked different. One had a much darker skin tone than the other. I panicked. I thought people would judge us, ask questions, and I couldn't accept it." I stared at him in disbelief. "So what did you do?" His voice shook. "I signed temporary guardianship papers through someone who claimed they could arrange a private adoption. I told everyone you had only one baby." My entire world collapsed. "You gave away our child?" He nodded, crying. "I thought I was protecting our family." I stepped back. "No. You destroyed our family." I couldn't even look at him anymore. I packed a small bag, picked up my son, and left the house that same night. As I sat in my mother's living room, I made myself one promise. No matter how long it took, no matter how difficult it became, I would find my missing child, even if I had to search every city in America, because somewhere, my baby was growing up without knowing who his real mother was, and I wasn't going to stop until I brought him home. The very next morning, I hired a family lawyer. His name was Michael Harris, and after listening to my story, he looked at me seriously. "Victoria, if what you're saying is true, this isn't just a family dispute. It could involve fraud and illegal adoption." For the first time in days, I felt a small spark of hope. Together, we requested every document from Evergreen Medical Center. A week later, the hospital called us. The medical records confirmed one thing beyond any doubt. I had given birth to twin boys, but one page was missing from the file. The page that recorded what happened to twin B. My lawyer immediately requested an internal investigation. A few days later, the hospital's security department reviewed old records and surveillance logs. They discovered something shocking. Just hours after my surgery, Jason had signed documents without my knowledge and met privately with a former hospital administrator. The hospital denied approving any legal adoption and reported the matter to the police. The investigation moved quickly. Police traced the paperwork to a private agency that had shut down years earlier after allegations of document fraud. My heart raced every time the phone rang. Then, one afternoon, Detective Sarah Mitchell called. "Mrs. Reed, we've found a family connected to the records." I could barely breathe. "Does that mean," she replied gently, "we believe your second son is alive?" Tears rolled down my face. For 2 years, I had believed my baby was gone forever. Now I finally knew he was alive. A court immediately ordered a DNA test. Those few days of waiting felt longer than the last 2 years. Finally, the results arrived. 99.99% match. The little boy was my son. I broke down in tears. After years of unanswered questions, I finally knew where my child was. But there was still one more step. I had to meet him, and I had no idea whether he would accept the woman who had been searching for him every single day. A week later, the family court granted permission for our first supervised meeting. My heart was pounding as I walked into the child services office. A social worker smiled gently. "Victoria, are you ready?" I nodded, even though my hands were shaking. The door slowly opened. A little boy walked into the room, holding a stuffed teddy bear. He looked around quietly, then our eyes met. For a moment, the world stood still. He had my eyes, my smile. Even the tiny birthmark on his left wrist matched the one his twin brother had. Tears filled my eyes. I knelt down and whispered, "Hi, I'm Victoria." He looked at me curiously. The social worker softly explained, "She's someone very special." The little boy slowly walked toward me. Without thinking, I opened my arms. He hugged me. I couldn't hold back my tears. For 2 years, I had dreamed of this moment. Now my son was finally in my arms. The couple who had been raising him stepped forward. They were crying too. The woman said, "We never knew he had been taken from his mother illegally. We were told everything was legal." I nodded. "I don't blame you. They loved him and gave him a safe home." The court later ruled that they had acted in good faith and had no role in the fraud. A gradual reunification plan was created so my son could safely build a relationship with me and his twin brother. A few weeks later, the twins met for the first time. At first, they looked at each other quietly. Then one of them smiled. Within minutes, they were running around the room together, laughing like they had known each other forever. Watching them play side by side healed a part of my heart that I thought was broken forever. Meanwhile, Jason stood before the court. The judge looked at him and said, "You made a life-changing decision without the mother's knowledge or consent." His actions had serious legal consequences, and the court held him accountable under the law. As he left the courtroom, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry," I calmly replied. "Some mistakes can be forgiven, but some can never be undone." For the first time in years, justice had finally begun. Months passed. Life slowly began to heal. The reunification plan helped both of my sons spend more and more time together. Every weekend, our house was filled with laughter. Watching the twins play side by side reminded me that hope can survive even the darkest moments. It wasn't always easy. There were emotional days, counseling sessions, and many difficult conversations. But with patience, love, and support, we slowly became a family again. One afternoon, I took both boys to the same park where I had dreamed of bringing my child years earlier. As I watched them race across the playground together, tears filled my eyes. For so long, I had blamed myself. I wondered if I had done something wrong, but I finally realized the truth. A mother's love never disappeared. It had simply been waiting for the chance to find its way back. A few weeks later, the court finalized my parental rights, and both of my sons officially came home. That evening, I tucked them into bed. One of them looked at me and asked, "Mom, are we always going to stay together now?" I smiled, kissed both of their foreheads, and said, "Yes, my angels. From now on, no one will ever separate us again." They closed their eyes with smiles on their faces. I quietly turned off the bedroom light and stood at the door for a moment. That was the moment I realized I had finally found peace. People often ask me what the hardest day of my life was. It wasn't the surgery. It wasn't waking up in the hospital. It wasn't even discovering that I had given birth to twins. The hardest part was living for 2 years without knowing that one of my children was out there, waiting for the truth. My name is Victoria Reed. At 23 years old, I learned that the people you trust the most can sometimes hide the biggest secrets. But I also learned something even more important. The truth may be delayed, but it has a way of finding the light. And a mother's love can cross any distance, overcome any lie, and survive any betrayal. If you enjoyed my story, remember this: never stop searching for the truth. Sometimes, one question can change your entire life.